If we went to a truly deregulated state where we said, you know what, there are just too many rules. We're just going to start indiscriminately getting rid of rules. Well, what rules do you get rid of? Do you get rid of environmental rules? Do you get rid of food safety rules? Do you get rid of medical regulation? What rules do you get rid of? And understanding that when you start rolling those rules back, there's a real world impact.
In this episode of the Virginia Consumer Podcast, we talk with someone whose legal and policy experience spans both the courtroom and the boardroom, Jim Moye. Currently Senior Vice President and Senior Counsel at the American Bankers Association, Jim brings over 2 decades of legal insight, including service as an Assistant Attorney General for D.C. and senior legal leadership roles across defense, trade, and government sectors. From consumer protection to regulatory compliance, Jim's career has centered on accountability and fairness. In this episode, Jim shares practical insights every consumer should hear before making any significant purchase.
When you have people who are bad actors, it throws it off for everyone involved, businesses, consumers, everybody. And we need to do what we can to root that out, to keep some semblance of order in the universe.
Well, if you're going to hype up a bunch of kids from the 80s, I mean, that's probably picture like Underoos and like the fake lifesaver and just fighting it out. So, Jim, if you could talk just a little bit, give a little bit of background on why you became a lawyer, what's the path that led you there, and then we'll jump right in.
First of all, thank you, Marty. Andy, thank you guys for having me on. The honest truth is I became a lawyer because my mom loved Perry Mason. And I used to watch Perry Mason with my mother as a little kid. And he was always the smartest guy in the room. And I always wanted to be the smartest guy in the room. And I said, well, I guess I should become a lawyer then I can be the smartest guy in the room. And, once you reach a certain level of education, it's got to be more than that. But that's the roots of it all. And, as I got older, it became about trying to help people. It became about solving problems. I tell law students all the time, hey, if you become a lawyer, you're a janitor. You're cleaning up on aisle 8. And, be it at the corporate level, be it in government. If you're a divorce lawyer, that's definitely cleaning up on aisle 9, right? And so, I think when you use law the way it should be used, it's about helping people. And, sure, you can do some things and you may make a little money along the way, but being able to help people, being able to help society be a better place, the law can definitely do that. And so that's what got me to where I am today, I think.
New Jersey is a highly regulated state where we do have a lot of protections in place. And then we move to Virginia, that is fundamentally a deregulated state. And I didn't understand that or even consider that could be the case in such a broad sense. And when I came here, I was like, oh, you're on your own. It's beyond buyer beware. They don't even have car lemon laws. So I know you understand deregulation really well. Can you explain it in a broader sense?
Yeah. So right now, I guess in the greater country, right, there's this kind of left versus right, liberal versus conservative, Republican versus Democrat argument about the regulated state. What does the regulated state really mean? The reality is that every day there are regulations that are governing everything you do. It governs the water you drink, the food you eat, the car you drive, the roads you drive on, how you're treated in your workplace, how you're paid, how taxes are taken out of your pay. So every step of your life is very regulated, even in the most unregulated of states, which southern states tend to be the lesser regulated states, generally speaking, which gets into a bunch of historical reasons as to why. But everyone, no matter where you are, we are a highly regulated society, even in America. Now, if you go to Europe and other places, it's double. But for here, we're very regulated. The argument now that is floating out there is we've got too much. There are just too many regulations. And, when people tend to say that to me, I always think, do you really mean that? Because I think you don't quite understand what it is that you're saying. Because, like I said, every step of your life, every step of your children's lives, the rest of your family's lives, there are regulations in place to level the playing field, to make it fair for you, to make it possible for you, to make it safe for you every day. If we went to a truly deregulated state where we said, you know what, there are just too many rules. There's just way too many rules, and we're just going to start indiscriminately getting rid of rules. Well, what rules do you get rid of? Do you get rid of health and safety rules? Do you get rid of environmental rules? Do you get rid of, food safety rules? Do you get rid of medical regulation? What rules do you get rid of? And understanding that when you start rolling those rules back, there's a real world impact. I was a government attorney both at the federal level and at the city level. And I can tell you, you start rolling rules back and you just let it just open up the aperture. That means the only regulation you would have is whoever you're dealing with. So for instance, as an example, if you were, dealing with an issue with the hospital, if you removed the regulations off of hospitals, then that means the hospital gets to choose the playing field. How many people get to actually go in and negotiate with the hospital? Think about that for a minute. When you show up at a hospital, it's never good news. Rarely is it good news. I mean, if you're having a child, that's a great thing, but even that can go sideways on you very quickly. So most people show up, they're having a problem. If they put a bill in front of you, where's the negotiation? You're in a situation. You don't have any power to negotiate over them. So if you had a deregulated state where, as an example, hospitals could just do whatever they chose to do, what's your fighting chance? What if they're wrong? What if they give you a bill for $10,000 and all you got was a Band-Aid and you weren't even seen by a doctor? What's your recourse in dealing with that? Right? That's part of what a regulated state is. It really it brings accountability for all parties. So regulation is not just a one-way street. There's accountability for consumers as well. So, I think what the average person needs to understand is they need to contextualize what the rules are. Regulations have been made the boogeyman, right? What you have are politicians on both sides of the aisle who will go find the most extreme example and say, see, that's why you can't have, regulations. Or someone will say, see, that's why you absolutely have to have them. The reality is you have to have some form of a regulated state. Otherwise, dear consumer, do you want to give your life over to corporate America? The same people who almost wrecked the world economy? Do you want to give everything over to hospitals? The same people who, lots of people have lots of issues with the healthcare system in America. Do you want to give it over to banks, financial systems? Do you want to give it over to the tech sector? If the answer is yes, then, well, then you clearly, probably, hopefully have thought that answer out. If not, then it's incumbent for people to have a common sense conversation about what is good regulation? What does that mean? Good regulation should almost be like background music. Good background music, it's there and you sort of kind of hear it, but it's not overwhelming to you. That's good regulation. And in my career, I've seen good regulation and I've seen bad regulation. But the good stuff is like great music, just playing in the background and you're driving down the road, having a good old time.
That's a great way of putting it. And I think the confusion has been purposeful. And I think they have taken the word regulation and made it on par with big government. right? So everyone already has this predisposition to want smaller government, like the government's a mess. We don't need to expand it. And then they just tag the word regulation onto that so that they could peel back all the rules that were helping corporate America to advance. But it's a scale. It's a scale with corporate rights on one hand and consumer rights on the other. And to tip it, that means you've got to give up your rights. And that's what I'm finding is starting to, I mean, it's wearing me down going through our situation. There's very little regulation when it comes to home construction. And there's no policing of it anyway. Let's say I approve the entire thing. Who's going to police it when there's no real oversight? And you have an agency like DPOR that says on the record, it doesn't promote any kind of criminality to Commonwealth attorneys. That's you're in charge and you're bypassing that responsibility, and there's no regulation in place to force that action. So criminal acts just continue. That's bad regulation to me. That's
It
a lack
is.
of yeah.
And I think you just pointed out a good thing. It's presented as a zero-sum game, right? That I only advance as a consumer by taking regulatory power away from the government, and the government can only be effective if it takes something away from the consumer. And that, to me, is the absolute wrong way of thinking of this. The reality is we live in a very diverse world. And when I say diverse, I mean diverse on every imaginable level. We are not governing for one group or type of person. The government is there to serve everybody's best interest as best it can. The only way you can do that is you have to have rules of the road, right? Because if you don't have rules of the road, you have the Hunger Games, right? Where, and again, is that what people really want? The average person doesn't want that. What they want is they want to know what the game is, understand it, and then they will go play by those rules. That, to me, that's what the average person wants. Where people tend to get upset is when you change the rules on them. Hey, I've been going this way all the time doing this thing, and now you're telling me it's not that? Well, when did that change? When did anybody tell me that it was changing? And so, when you think about how can we best, how does government best serve us? How does it best serve us as consumers? It's help protect us from, not just from corporate America. Sometimes it's protecting us from ourselves also. And there are philosophical arguments about that. There are some people who say, listen, it's not the government's responsibility to stop you from getting a credit card that you can't afford. That's a personal accountability thing. Why is the government in the middle of those types of things? Fair point to some degree. But that also gets complicated because sometimes people are being manipulated. Sometimes people are, they're told that it's right when it's really left, all those kind of things. So, again, that's where you get into the question of what is fair. I tend to believe that if we keep going down the path of just deregulating everything, just indiscriminately, just getting rid of regulations, that's not going to work out well for businesses in the long run for a few reasons. I think number one, they also want to have consistency. They also want to be able, because that's what drives a business. You can only be successful in business when you have stability. There are very few businesses I'm aware of that could thrive in instability. Number two, you want to get rid of the bad actors. Regulations help industries get rid of bad actors because bad actors are bad for an entire industry. I mean, again, you look at the mortgage crisis in 2007, that's a prime example. You had bad actors. albeit you had quite a few bad actors on different levels. But when you have bad actors, how does the public see that? They don't see the one or two bad actors, or in that case, the 50%, 60% of bad actors. They see an entire industry. So regulation helps weed out the bad actors. Uh, I think as we continue moving down, if we keep going down this path, we're going to end up in a corner, in a box, right? Where if you're just pressing consumers, you're not doing enough to protect them, people are going to get angry. And what the response is going to be to that is not going to be what either the government or businesses will want, because that's how you get over the top burdensome regulation, because people will be angry. And I say will be angry. I think most consumers are angry now. I can't think of any person you could find who, if you ask them, hey, as a consumer, do you think the playing field is level? I, I'm going to, you always have a person who is, half full, right? So you may find 5% of the people, 95% of people will be like, no, it's not. No, it's not fair. And so if you keep squeezing and keep squeezing, and you start removing regulations, and you start letting, businesses do whatever they want, and the government has no role in trying to protect consumers, that's not going to end well for, like I said, for businesses or the government. And consumers will have a say in this. They ultimately will put pressure on people, and there are ways they do that. People wonder why elections in the US are so volatile, how in, one election people voted for Barack Obama, and in the next election they elected Donald Trump, and in the next they voted in for Joe Biden, that they swing back and forth between Democrats and Republican, conservative. That's not, when you think about it, the average American's political spectrum is pretty narrow. I think it's fairly narrow. It's not to the edges of anything. It's fairly centrist. And you see that volatility because people are desperately looking for someone to go fight for them because they don't feel like they're getting it. I heard a political consultant say something, and I agree with this, and that is people vote for what they're not getting. And I think consumers feel like they're not getting because it always feels like something's always being changed on you, that the prices are going up, but you're getting less for it. This last election, there was this thing about shrinkflation, that, you're paying more on average for things, but literally you're getting less for it. And so part of what drives all of that is we've got to reset in the country how we look at this. Now, this is about Virginia. So at the lowest levels, how do we do it? I think it starts with how we vote, right? You got to start with every council member you have to go in and vote for, the mayors you vote for. You put people on notice that, hey, I want you to go to work for me, and everybody stop trying to inure to whatever whatever party you're in, whatever's going on at the national level. All politics start local, right? Here we have a problem where there is a disconnect as a consumer. There really is. And I do feel you all's pain about, there's a disconnect as a consumer, whether you're buying a home, whatever it is that you're engaged in. It does not feel like the regulation necessarily matches up to the protection that you need. And here's the thing, that's not an easy answer to figure out that sweet spot, but no one's having the conversation. No one's saying, okay, let's look at this and let's figure out how we can do it better. Because in some instances, the answer probably is, let's roll some things back. That group of regulations are a little over the top. In this other side, you know what? We probably need more protections over there. But it's a big, wide analysis, and it's hard work. You know, it's the famous Kennedy line from his speech, and of course I'm going to get it wrong, but you know, he said, you know, we choose to go to the moon not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Why why do we always run from things that are hard? This is hard. Trying to figure out how to have a good, proper, appropriate, regulated state is hard, and it's moving constantly, right? Because you're addressing the market, you're addressing trends, you're trying to, you know, you're not trying to be overly burdensome, but you're trying to make sure people are protected, and that's hard work. And you know what it also requires people to do? Talk to consumers, which they don't do that. They talk to you when there's an election. So, you know, I feel like I'm preaching.
Yeah, well, I want to say something there because it feels like that's still it's pointing to the answer of a political solution, and I think it's kind of like you have one bad army take over a society, or one power take over a society. It doesn't mean that power was good. That was just the other one was bad, and that's the outcome. And maybe there's some gain or some benefit. So it's like what I've seen is a lot of hiding behind perceptions. Like if we bring an issue to somebody in public office in Virginia, public office or appointed office, or even public sector for a lot of these folks, the immediate position is to defend people we're not questioning, to shift the blame. In other words, our people are good. Well, I didn't ask about your people. I wasn't pointing to your people. I'm asking about what you did or what you said or how you answered. And I've seen it over and over again. They'll answer a different question in response. And they keep doing it, and they front load conversations over and over and again. And so what I've seen isn't so much a question of just deregulation. I've seen them avoid the rule of law altogether, because as bad as the regulations may be, there are still laws on the books, and they're refusing to follow those.
Let me ask one other question, because I've been curious about this the whole time. There's only 2 states in the whole country where you can't have class action lawsuits as consumers. And that is so problematic on so many levels, because if there's a trend like we're seeing with bad builders, big name builders, causing multiple problems, you can't become a collective and pool your resources to protect your neighbors. There's a disconnect between the rights of corporate builders and private citizens. And it's also funny that those 2 states, which are Virginia and Mississippi, are number 1 and number 2 for new corporations moving into the area. So I think it's a signal almost to corporations like, hey, real easy to do business here. Consumers can't really do much. They don't have collective power. So if something goes wrong, it's favorable. This is the state for business. You know what I mean? As an outsider, that's immediately what I think. It's the only place you can't do, class action lawsuits. So what are you going to have? You're going to have chemical spills. You're going to have worker rights issues. You're going to have lower pay. You're going to have less benefits. It all falls in line. How is it possible that that's not federally protected, to have the ability to have class action lawsuits?
Legally, it's complicated, because that's actually that's getting tested heavily right now. Since the new administration came in, there have been lots of class action lawsuits put into the federal system, and what we know of class actions may be changing at the federal level. So I could give you a long, very drawn out answer, but here's the best one. It's changing. You have a judiciary at the highest levels. The Supreme Court, has a very directional bent. Regardless of people's politics, that's actually kind of almost not up for debate. It has a bent to it, and that bent is very conservative in nature. It's really kind of leaning away from the ability to have class action lawsuits and really putting significant constraints on the ability to bring class action lawsuits. So even if you do get it to the federal level, it's not as wide open as it used to be in order to do that. A lot of this, and to your point, especially in the South, southern states, southern legislatures are starting to lock up the ability for people to get into these class action lawsuits. I'm originally from Texas. Texas is very much open for business and seeing huge corporate growth over the last decade, and it's because they regulate far less than others. You would think on one hand that's great. I could make a heck of an argument that it's not that great, because sure, that's great that you've invited all these companies in, and they're building, and the state in many ways is growing, but growing into what, right? Because if you bring in bad actors who underpay your people, who are polluting the environment, who are, to Marty's earlier point, creating this unlevel playing field by taking resources away from one to go to the other side, you're messing with the ecosystem. And the ecosystem, one thing about, not to get too in the clouds with this, one thing that makes our general capitalist system and democratic system kind of work is that it is a very frail, balanced ecosystem, right? There are a lot of things we take for granted in this country that do not exist in other countries for the good. And it's all been because it's been balanced. There hasn't been anything that shifted everything one huge way or the other. It's been always this just kind of range holding up. You get into a world where you start to tip it too much, it's not going to look like what we're used to. And it's not going to be it's not going to end where people think it's going to end when you do that. I'm a big believer in history. History's undefeated. People can say what they want. People can go pie in the sky, and they can think about American exceptionalism that, we're above it all. Yeah, that's all great. History is undefeated. When you do certain things, you're asking for certain types of outcomes. But I want to address something that Marty said. Having worked in government, one thing, I'm of two minds. Number one, I worked with a lot of really good people who worked very hard every day. They came into the office. They really wanted to do right by people. And a lot of times were underpaid, underappreciated for their jobs. But just like in corporate America, you have people you just shake your head like, how did that person ever get that job? Same thing in government. So you have people who are just not good. And I don't mean elected officials. I mean the bureaucrat class who are horrible at their jobs. They don't know how to manage. They don't know how to best represent people. They have no customer service skills whatsoever. And they end up in the wrong position. Or, there are people who are just grotesquely unqualified, right? It's the same as what you would see in any other entity, right? You got people who are just not great at their jobs. Now, the difference is, are you relying on a corporation every day kind of to keep this ecosystem going? No, you're relying really on multiple levels of government to do that. So it actually means more that you have Joe who's incompetent sitting in a county clerk's office versus, someone who works in the federal government. It's very, 15 levels deep in some federal agency. And so the other point you made, Marty, about they're not, this won't all be addressed. This won't all be a political solution. I agree. Consumers have to be educated. They have to be prepared to hold people accountable. They have to hold themselves accountable. That's the other thing we all kind of don't talk about enough is, do we do enough to hold ourselves accountable? If you go out and you get educated on financial services and all those types of things, and then you still walk down a particular path, you're making it hard to protect you when you've been educated that, for instance, here's a great example of this: payday loans. Payday loans, I think most people know that payday loans are horrible. And once you get caught in that maelstrom of payday loans, people have a very hard time extracting themselves back out of that, which is why some states have, stopped allowing payday loans altogether. Because once you're caught in that loop, you're not easily getting out of that. But knowing that, knowing all the education that's out there, knowing everything that's been talked about with payday loans. Now, some people have made the conscious decision that, listen, I don't make enough. I'm working 2 jobs. I'm working 3 jobs, and I cannot pay the bills. That is my only path. Then that's what you have to do. But if you're not in that situation and you're still going down that road, it's hard to regulate for that. It's hard to regulate for just really bad decision making on people's parts. And that's what I mean by this is hard. Good regulation is hard, and trying to kind of gauge all of that. But I think the education piece is number one. Number two is collective consumer action. So collective consumer action is literally being able to, maybe it's a nonprofit where people come in and say, I'm having these types of issues, so that someone can help direct you to legal services if that's what you need. Sometimes it's not legal services that people need. They need an advocate, someone who can just help them organize the paper, organize their thoughts, so that they can go back to whoever they need to go back to, be it, a hospital or a company or their employer, and have a conversation. So it's not always, a legal eagle that's needed. Sometimes it's someone who can just help them organize the facts and organize kind of what they're seeing and what they're thinking. So I really do believe having some form of collective action and organizing really makes a difference. And especially if it were a nonprofit that could provide those types of services free to people, to say, hey, you feel like you're, because, medical bills are a good example of how people very quickly can become overwhelmed. Could you imagine being 70, 75, 80 years old? You have to go in and have some surgical procedure that's an emergency, and then you get home and all of a sudden you are deluged with medical bills. I am a lawyer. When my father was having health issues before he passed away, I would go through and sort the medical bills. I had no idea what was going on. And I consider myself a very intelligent man. How would a 70, 75, 60, 65, 40, 45, 50-year-old deal with that? They can't. It's almost like it's overwhelming for overwhelming's sake. But what if you had, entities, and there are some small examples of this, entities that can just help people and help advocate on their behalf. That's how you start to turn it outside of the political system. But I think that collective organizing also eventually, hopefully, would have a political effect as well, right? Because if you start talking about rolling back regulations that would make the playing field unequal, you would hope that organizations like that could show not just to the masses, but to the government, like, why are you doing that? We have 50 stories about why you shouldn't do that thing. We can show you what the practical effect of you, acting a particular way will have. And that's what you need, right? Because when we're all individually trying to fight it, it's hard to weave a narrative. But if you've actually got a database, you've got somebody who's serving as a referee who can pull those stories together, that's how people become educated about how bad a problem really is. How bad that's how sometimes you figure out there's a bad actor is some type of collective action like that. So I think thinking about collective action is very important. And I think that's something that, people are embarrassed, people are tired, people are struggling in their own lives. They're like, I don't have time to go deal with other people's problems. But it's like, yeah, but sometimes the path forward to resolution for you is being able to throw in with other people because they're in the exact same position as you. And they can help you find a path forward. And I think more collective consumer organizations that can support people, I think that's hugely important. Especially if it could be low cost or no cost to people. I think that's part of the way we bring balance back to the plane.
I don't want to get off topic, but it's kind of on topic. Andrea got a call. Andrea, I want you to tell them the story about we got a lot of stories, but the one specifically about the Commonwealth attorney from the governor's office that gave you a call. We'll touch on that. We won't delve in all the other items if you could.
Oh, just to give me a call to alter a FOIA request that I had placed, and they didn't want to give me the documentation. So there is this tendency at the office to cite working papers, governor's working papers on the fifth day of a FOIA request, because if it's after 3:00, then they know they're going to get an extension or they can block you altogether. So they do it late on certain days. And I just stuck it out. And I was like, if you're not going to give it to me, you have to justify it to me. Either show me the fee schedule or tell me why, prove that it's working papers. And I got a call from a Commonwealth attorney who was representing the FOIA office, who told me to rescind it or change it because it was going to be in the tens of thousands of dollars if I asked for these documents, because there were so many. And he claimed that my request was for all documentation from the governor's office since inauguration, which it wasn't. It had specific case numbers attached, specific people, specific dates and times, the conversations that I wanted to see. And the entire reason was because we reported alleged criminality that we thought was happening in the state. And instead of pursuing it or doing anything about it, the state put us on a constituent tracker after we reported. So I was trying to see what are the conversations that are being had where those decisions are made, to not pursue the criminality, to not look into what's wrong, but to demonize citizens who are trying to alert that there's a greater issue, and then who would think they would spend the time to have attorneys call you in your home unsolicited when you're just a citizen trying to get information. And it was funny because I had just taken the FOIA Counsel's class to get certified to do the FOIA request. So I'm like, this is highly unusual. It's not even discussed. I've not heard of that happen. I'm not saying it can't happen. I just think it's unusual to protect conversation about myself so hard.
I think some of this is about, one of the things I saw when I was in government is that most people are institutionalist. So they get very into protecting the institution at all costs, no matter if the institution is wrong, and especially in the gray areas, right? If it's something that is abundantly illegal, unethical, or immoral, most people will stand up for that. But it's the close call stuff or if they don't see the whole story and they're just quickly churning through something, sometimes people will just become institutionalists and be like, well, the institution couldn't possibly be wrong. That's why we're the institution. And that was always an issue I had when I was in government, that of course people can be wrong. You can be wrong for a million different reasons. And being wrong, generally speaking, is okay, because once you know you're wrong, then just correct it. It's not complicated stuff. And to me, in your situation with the FOIA piece, Jim's view of the world, dispatching an attorney to you is the wrong answer. The right answer is send an analyst to you and talk it through with the analyst. Like, okay, what is it that you're actually trying to get to here? You know, one of the things I just had this conversation with my law school interns. I said, when you show up, the first question you should ever ask, I don't care what level, where you're working, what you're doing, when you are dealing with an issue, the first question you should ask is, what is it you are trying to do? Right. How about right? Because a lot of times most people may ask for this, but they want that. Right? But they don't know how to ask for that. So they're asking you for this. So you ask them, you cut to the chase. What is it that you're trying to do? And that was the question that should have been properly asked of you all, is what are you trying to do? Right? What are you trying to accomplish? Because then that way, then that becomes a collaborative thing. It can work back from that. But like I said, people become institutionalists. I don't think they look at that the right way. But you know what? I am sorry that you all have gone through what you have gone through, but there's something educational for all Virginians in this, and that is people should not be scared to fight for their rights as consumers. Marty, to your point, I think people get nervous and they're like, well, I mean, if that means I have to send something to the mayor, or I have to send something, I don't, that's mayor, that's my council member, that's my state assemblyman, or that's my state senator, or whoever, whoever it may be. And it's like, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. No one will advocate for you better than you can advocate for yourself. And you don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to be the world's most articulate person. And, a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to be, a problem. I don't want to be troublesome. And it's not that. It's, if you have a problem, you should speak up. Don't be afraid to speak up for yourself. And again, I make the plug for, I think this is why collective action groups are helpful, right? Because that gives people cover to go deal with the issues, because sometimes people are just afraid to go do it on their own. They're like, I don't know where to go. There's only so many hours in the day. And right. And they're just overwhelmed by that. But people can't be afraid to stand up for themselves, because if you're not prepared to stand up for yourself, it's hard to have other people stand up for you. But I think it's important for the entire ecosystem. Every single time a consumer is wrong, it's important, because I promise you that one thing will not exist in a bubble by itself. Ever. That one problem will metastasize. Guaranteed. If it hasn't already, and you were just now number 1,888, right? Your builder, guaranteed, probably. There have been other issues before you all were long on the scene, right? That's what I mean by it almost never happens in a bubble. Almost never.
Yeah, if it happened to us, it happened to someone else. And
Absolutely.
that's how it goes. And if we're not saying anything and working together, what are we doing? But I think the way that you put it, for me, I've always said, where's the collective? What do you do? What an awesome opportunity to have nurses, who need a chance to volunteer, help people go through their medical bills, or maybe attorneys, oh, you need to ask something of your legislator. I have some office hours. I'll donate. What an awesome concept. In every category, I could see a million possibilities. And it would do so much good, because I think a lot of people are fearful and don't want to be a burden. So, and it is hard. It's weird to get phone calls, I'm not gonna lie, from the governor's attorneys, or like just happened, the attorney general's office, like, oh, you're dealing with me now. Well, it's a FOIA request, I
Right.
shouldn't have to. That's odd. And it's off-putting, and I'm sure it deters people, you know? So, and
Absolutely.
it's silly, really. So I think a collective is great for witness, it's great for community, it's great for resources, and that could really turn the tide. It's just been such a like Wild West system here for so long. We've got to do something different.
Yep.
Well, you said the collective and the nonprofit, and it makes me think. So I'm not going to name the organization, but I had conversations. This is probably 2 years ago, because we've been in this lawsuit situation for a long time. And I talked with somebody who was involved with a very well-known charity, and um, a big part of their support comes from the construction building trades, the builders, really. And so they knew how things are supposed to work because of the particular job, their career they had prior to this. And they told me they couldn't they said everything that happened was wrong. They felt bad for me, sincerely, but they couldn't get involved because they were afraid that their support would get pulled from the builders, because it would make the builders look bad. If you struggled your whole life in Virginia and you had a house, let's say, that was half of what we paid for ours, and you had the same outcome, guess what? You'd be homeless. You'd be homeless.
Right.
And nobody would help you. And in fact, they would shame you for calling out not bad work, but broken laws. They would shame you for that. And they would still go on TV and freaking smile and talk about a stadium or some nonsense that isn't really going to make our society any better. Anyway, that's enough of preaching for me. I'm sorry. I just
Yeah.
got worked up.
Well,
You did.
but I'll just say
You
this.
did.
I think your point is well taken, and it's bad. It goes back to the ecosystem thing, right? We've lost, not to get woo-woo about it, but we've lost this thing, right? That if Marty's in a bad way, I have to understand that eventually is going to put me in a bad way, and that you know the sense of balance and community, we need those things. We need good consumer protection. It works for businesses too, because number one, you don't want bad actors out there making all businesses look bad. And if imagine if you actually had somebody who was helping with collective action. If you're a business and you've gone 20 rounds with someone and it ends in litigation, what if there was an organization that could have helped? I'm going to use the term loosely, helped mediate the situation before it went way down that road, right? Then that's less, from a business perspective, that's less resources you had to use on something. And you can move on and keep doing what you're doing, or maybe correct whatever it is you need to correct. And the consumer is in a better place than they were. Like, there's so much we can do to fix these things, but we can't get tired with wanting to fix them, because it's very easy to just get tired and get angry and just be done with the whole thing. Like, you know what? I've just had enough. I'm out. That's not, that's not, that's not in anybody's best interest. I know we always tend to see things kind of in our four walls, but it's like we said earlier, almost nothing from a consumer perspective happens in a bubble. So if you're having that problem, somebody else is having that problem. So people just have to remember they're probably not in this alone. There are other people out there going through it too, and you deserve better. We all deserve better. Life is hard, right? I think we all figure that out once you get older, you become a parent, married. Life is not easy. And just, dealing with a home that's not right, that's creating issues, both health issues, emotional issues. You go to work all day to come home to that? You deserve better. You absolutely deserve better. And, you know, collectively as a community, we should want better for all of our community members. And no one should have to go through that. It's not in anybody's best interest to do that. And we all deserve better. And you all definitely deserve better than what you've got.
Well, I'll tell you what, after everything happened, I told Marty, I told everybody, I'll never vote again. I've tried it all. I'll never do it again. But if you ever run for office, I'll take it back. And I don't take a lot back, but I will show up for you because you are right on. And that's exactly what we need. We need people who actually have a heart to serve others in these legal positions. Lawyers get such a bad rap, but the good ones are great. And you do it because you love people and you want to make sure everyone has a good home, a good life, and can rest easy. We want to live a little together happily. And we've lost our way. So, I mean, you've given me so much to think about and a structure that I couldn't quite put together in my own mind. But that's what we're lacking. The government's going to take forever to fix, but we can come up with community groups and small consumer groups to help each other out. For sure.
And the one plug I would make is don't give up on voting. And the only reason I say that is this is a problem that's a multi-tiered problem, right? So we're going to have, I think, generally speaking, as consumers, we're going to have to address this multiple ways. There's not, unfortunately, one silver bullet that'll correct it. And I think letting people sit on the public dole who aren't serving our need, if they were in a private business and you own that business, would you keep them? No, you'd fire them. So they should be fired off the public roll too. I mean, I used to never want to talk when I was in the government. I used to bristle at talking about it that way. Now that I'm out of the government, I absolutely think of it that way. Like, it's one thing when you go to work every day and you're trying, and I may not like a policy or I may not like how you handled something, but you're doing something. But if you're just sitting there and you're not doing anything and you're not doing anything to respect what I tried to do when I was in the government, you got to go. Go find another job somewhere else. And definitely you should not be in the government. Right. No, be it at city, county, or state, federal, you got to go. Go start your own business. Go figure it out. But just to sit on the public dole and make, people who work hard in the government every day look bad because you can't sort it out. It's that kind of foolishness that means good, hardworking people like you, it makes you want to give up on the system. And that's not right. They need to go. They shouldn't be able to sit there comfortably. If you're not comfortable, they shouldn't be comfortable. If you can't sleep at night, they shouldn't be able to sleep at night. That's what doing the job right should be, that they should always be out in front for their constituents, and not enough of them, regardless of party tag, are doing that.
Well, we've experienced it. I'm finding my hope. This is giving me my hope back bit by bit. The more I learn, the more I talk this stuff out with other people. I'm not alone. I might have to rethink some things in a good way. We'll have to see.
That's the thing is people coming together, talking about I think the good news is TV is just awful now. So there's a lot more free time that you can fill. Most of my time is podcasts and things like that. I like to hear ideas. So I think that creates an opportunity. And I think generationally, we're at that point where it's like you really start thinking about big picture and generational, what you're going to do for future generations and how you're going to go out. So I think it's a good time for us people who care, and I don't think there needs to be a lot of us. I think 10 to 15% of us who actually care and actually stand up for what's right. that's enough to influence and change everything. It doesn't have to be everybody. But I think this was phenomenal. I have a lot of different things I want to get into. I'm not going to. I'll leave that for other conversations, but it made me think of all kinds of stuff. So we very much appreciate your time. The last thing that I want to hit on, is there any cause, any organization that you think deserves a lot of attention, a lot of awareness, that is doing the right thing for people?
I think there are quite a few. Unfortunately, a little on the spot right now. But I can, given a second to think about it, I can probably provide you all some the names of some organizations kind of at the local level who I think are doing good things to help people, right? Because I think that's what it comes back to, is creating that network. And that may be the answer too, is that disparately there are 10, 15 organizations that are doing things, but they're very much singularly focused, and it's being able to pull them together as a network, right? So even if it's a resource that's provided to people that says, hey, here are 10 organizations and here are all the things they do. In an ideal world, it would be great if there was one organization you could go to help you, but here's at least a resource to say, you're having medical, you're having issues with your medical bills and trying to sort all that stuff out. There's X organization that's out there doing that. Let's connect you with them, right? So that you can get the help you need.
It made me think that the way we should end every episode is to plug a cause, bring attention. And it could be an individual situation. It could be an organization. It could be anything, but collectively bringing attention to things that need daylight. Because I think if the best way to fight is transparency and exposure, and if the state doesn't solve for it, you always turn to the people because they're in charge.
Yep. Well, and I think it's important that you all are doing this. Number one, it's a positive way to channel the frustration that you felt, but it's also educating people to the fact that, and because there are plenty of other people who are going through similar situations to what you're going through, and being able to say to them, you're not alone. You're not out here alone. And that, eventually over time, maybe it'll be the path to root out not just the builder, but other bad actors who aren't doing what they should be doing on our behalf. And they're, sitting on they're in their roles to support taxpayers. But and this is an effort to bring order back to the universe. I mean, I went very Star Wars with it, but, really, this is it, right? Think about what Star Wars is all about. You had somebody who pops up in the ecosystem and is essentially a glorified cancer in the ecosystem. It throws everything off and here we go, right? Same thing. It's the same thing. When you have people who are bad actors, it throws it off for everyone involved, businesses, consumers, everybody. And we need to do what we can to root that out, to keep some semblance of order in the universe. So,
well, if you're going to hype up a bunch of kids from the 80s, I mean, that's probably picture like Underoos and like the fake lifesaver and just fighting it out. And you're like, someday, I'm going to lose my hair and I'm going to have to find a cause to believe in. This is it.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Have a big blow up R2D2 doll.
Right.
There you go.
Or a Chewy doll.
Yep.
Right on. Yeah. That's been great, Jim.
Thanks for listening to Virginia Consumer. Everything shared on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. The views expressed are personal opinions based on the individual experiences of our hosts and guests. They do not constitute legal, financial, or medical advice and do not represent the views of any affiliated individuals or organizations. Always do your own research and consult a qualified professional about your specific situation.